Jung once made a chilling discovery that shook even him. 73% of his most dangerous patients all showed one identical warning sign before they turned destructive. What makes this sign so dangerous is that it doesn't show up as aggression, cruelty, or anything you'd normally associate with danger. In fact, it hides behind charm, wit, and seemingly harmless personalities. People who project warmth, intelligence, and care can still carry this hidden red flag. And here's the unsettling part. Jung insisted that when you spot this sign, your best, sometimes your only, protection is immediate distance. No debate, no reasoning, no negotiation. Just get out. That's because this sign doesn't announce itself with loud drama. It's subtle, almost invisible at first glance, but once it unfolds, it becomes deadly, socially, emotionally, and psychologically. So what is this hidden danger? Jung discovered that it appears when someone begins projecting their shadow onto others with absolute conviction. Now, if you're not familiar with Jung's work, the shadow refers to all the hidden aspects of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. Our selfishness, jealousy, manipulative tendencies, anger. Everyone has a shadow. It's normal. But the danger begins when someone refuses to see their own darkness and instead starts placing those qualities onto the people around them. And here's what most people don't realize. Shadow projection isn't just a fancy psychological concept. It's a full-blown warning system. Recognizing it can literally protect your sanity and your relationships. A patient who changed Jung forever. Back in 1913, Jung treated a patient who seemed like the last person you'd ever consider dangerous. He was charming, articulate, thoughtful. He appeared genuinely concerned for others. By all outward measures, he looked like the model of a decent human being. But Jung noticed something odd. Whenever this patient described someone else as manipulative, cruel, or dishonest, the traits were oddly specific. So specific, in fact, that Jung recognized them as the patient's own hidden qualities. This wasn't just projection in the casual sense. It was systematic. The patient was certain that others were guilty of behaviors he himself refused to acknowledge. And the results were catastrophic. Within just 6 months, this man had destroyed 3 close relationships, gotten 2 coworkers fired, and driven his own brother to a nervous breakdown. And yet, he carried himself as though he were innocent, the victim in every single situation. That's when Jung realized he was looking at something profoundly dangerous. Unconscious shadow projection mixed with absolute conviction. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't miscommunication. This was a psychological mechanism capable of destroying lives while leaving the projector feeling pure, righteous, and blameless. What neuroscience later confirmed. Now, here's where it gets even more disturbing. Modern neuroscience has shown us why this process feels so convincing, not only to the projector, but to everyone around them. Stanford researcher Robert Sapolsky found that when someone is in the middle of projecting with conviction, the same neural networks light up as when someone is in a delusional state. In other words, the projector's brain literally rewrites reality to match their distorted belief. This is why confronting them doesn't work. They're not just lying. Their perception has actually been hijacked. To them, it feels real. That's why these people are often persuasive. They look you in the eye and accuse you with absolute certainty, because in their mind, there's nothing to doubt. And because humans are wired to trust conviction, other people get pulled into their reality too. This is what psychologists now call reality distortion fields. A projector doesn't just misperceive you. They pull others into seeing you through their warped lens. Jung documented case after case where one person's projections spread like wildfire, destroying reputations, collapsing families, even dismantling entire communities. Have you experienced this? Think about the last time someone accused you of intentions you never had or emotions you never felt. Maybe they told others you were manipulative, cruel, selfish, when you knew with absolute clarity that you weren't acting that way. But here's the kicker. When they said it, they didn't sound unsure. They sounded certain. And no amount of explanation, no evidence, no emotional appeal could shift their belief. That's shadow projection in real time. And the stronger the projection, the more convinced the projector becomes. It's a vicious feedback loop. Entire families can get trapped in this loop. Entire workplaces, whole communities. And this isn't just Jung's theory. Ancient traditions recognized it too. Buddhism describes it as looking into a darkened mirror and mistaking your own impurities as if they belong to others. Christianity warns about spotting the speck in your neighbor's eye while ignoring the beam in your own. But Jung went further. He showed that projectors don't just distort reality, they create alternate realities. These realities feel so real to them that they become equally convincing to others who get caught in their orbit. The critical warning sign. So how do you spot when this is happening? Jung said, the warning appears the moment you notice a complete mismatch between how someone describes you and your actual inner experience. They tell you what you think, what you feel, what your motives are, none of which actually exist in your mind. And they say it with such unshakable certainty that you begin to question your own reality. That's when you're dealing with psychological gaslighting, not the conscious manipulative kind, but the unconscious, insidious version. And here's the real danger. It rarely stays isolated. Shadow projectors almost always try to recruit others into their distorted reality. Jung called this collective possession, when an entire group gets hypnotized by one person's projections. Psychologist Leon Festinger explained why this works. When someone presents their version of reality with absolute certainty, others feel pressure to align with that conviction, even if their own perceptions contradict it. This is how families turn on one member, how workplaces mob a single employee, how communities ostracize individuals based on accusations that are more fantasy than fact. The projector becomes the center of a psychological storm, and everyone else gets organized around their projections, while the real person, the target, becomes isolated, confused, and eventually broken down. Jung's 5 warning signs. Through decades of work, Jung identified 5 unmistakable signs that show when projection has crossed into the dangerous zone. 1. Absolute certainty about your motivations. They don't say, I think you might be. They say, you are. 2. Immunity to evidence. No matter how much you explain or clarify, they twist your words into proof of their original accusation. 3. Intense emotions out of proportion. They explode with outrage or sadness over things that seem minor or non-existent. Their emotions reveal their shadow, not your behavior. 4. Endless victim narratives. They're always the one being wronged. Different people. Same story. They're perpetually innocent, surrounded by villains. 5. Recruitment. They try to get others to see you the way they do, usually through concerned conversations about your character. We've already seen how unconscious shadow projection can ruin lives. But Jung also discovered something even more dangerous. A state called ego inflation. Unlike shadow projectors, who are usually unaware of what they're doing, inflated individuals are completely convinced of their own superiority, wisdom, or moral purity. They don't just misperceive reality. They believe they embody something larger, almost divine. And that's what makes them so dangerous. Because when someone truly believes they're the savior, the truth bearer, or the righteous judge, you're no longer dealing with ordinary human arrogance. You're dealing with a person who has become identified with archetypal powers far bigger than their actual ego can handle. Ego inflation. Why it's more dangerous than narcissism. Here's the tricky part. Inflated individuals often don't look like the narcissists we easily recognize. Narcissists usually demand attention and admiration in obvious ways. You can spot them. Inflated people, on the other hand, may appear spiritually advanced, morally superior, or intellectually enlightened. They often speak in calm tones, radiate confidence, and project a sense of higher authority. They seem like leaders, healers, or visionaries, and that's why people trust them. They're not loud, they're not boastful. They present themselves as the wise ones who see beyond ordinary perception. But this appearance of elevation conceals an enormous blind spot. They have absolutely no awareness of their shadow. When Jung studied these people, he noticed they weren't just identifying with their own thoughts. They were identifying with archetypes, ancient, universal patterns of the psyche. The savior, the prophet, the righteous warrior. Archetypes carry tremendous psychological energy, and when someone identifies with one unconsciously, they become possessed by it. They stop being individuals. They become embodiments of roles. And because those roles feel cosmic in scope, they justify extreme actions. Warning signs of ego inflation. Jung identified several red flags that reveal when someone has slipped into this state, never doubting their own motives. Genuine teachers and wise people admit uncertainty. They acknowledge mystery. Inflated people, never. They treat their own perceptions as absolute truth, interpreting disagreement as evil. If you question them, you're not simply offering another perspective. You're resisting truth itself. To them, pushback is proof of corruption, ignorance, or even malice. Charisma mixed with rigidity. Their conviction makes them magnetic. People feel drawn to their certainty. But beneath that charm is a complete lack of flexibility. They can't adapt. They can't self-reflect. Moral superiority. They don't just think they're right. They believe they embody righteousness, which means if you disagree, you're not only wrong, you're immoral. And here's the devastating part. Inflated individuals usually cause destruction before they collapse. Jung warned that no human ego can withstand the tension of identifying with powers larger than itself. Eventually they break. But before that collapse, they often drag others down with them. The mask that becomes the person. Another danger Jung identified comes from what he called the persona, the social mask we all wear in public. Normally, a healthy persona is flexible. We wear different masks depending on context, professional at work, more relaxed with friends, maybe tender and vulnerable with family. But behind the masks, we still know who we really are. Some people, though, become so invested in their mask that they lose touch with their authentic self entirely. Jung called this persona identification. And while it doesn't look dangerous at first, it can be terrifying once the cracks show. These people often appear flawless, always polite, always appropriate, always smiling at the right time. They know what to say in every situation. They never reveal flaws, mistakes, or darker emotions. But perfection comes at a cost, because the more energy they put into maintaining their mask, the more pressure builds up in the unconscious. And when that pressure finally erupts, it does so violently. Jung described cases where persona-identified individuals suddenly exploded in fits of rage, cruelty, or self-destructive behavior, precisely because all their shadow content had been bottled up. Warning signs of persona identification. Jung noted 3 clear signs that someone may be trapped in their mask. Uncanny social perfection. They never seem to slip up. Never an awkward moment. Never a bad day. Their life looks polished on the outside, but too polished. Artificial interactions. Conversations with them feel hollow, rehearsed, or staged. You can't quite put your finger on it. But something feels off. Extreme defensiveness when their image is challenged. Even mild criticism hits them like a bomb. Because it's not just feedback, it's an attack on the only identity they've allowed themselves to have. The paradox is chilling. The more perfect the mask, the more destructive the eventual eruption. Archetypal possession. Now we enter perhaps the darkest danger Jung described: archetypal possession. This happens when someone's individual identity completely dissolves into an archetype. They're no longer themselves. They become a mouthpiece for forces that feel ancient, universal, even divine. You can recognize this possession because their personality seems to vanish. Their voice shifts. Their eyes change. They start speaking with an authority that doesn't match their actual experience. And they often slip into familiar roles. The eternal victim, always suffering, always demanding rescue. The righteous warrior, locked in cosmic battle against invisible enemies. The divine parent, treating other adults like children who need their control. On the surface, this can look inspiring. They radiate certainty, purpose, conviction. But the danger lies in the polarities of archetypes. The same savior energy that produces saints also produces fanatics. And inevitably, the shadow side emerges. The savior becomes controlling. The warrior becomes destructive. The victim becomes manipulative. Jung recorded cases where archetypally possessed individuals committed shocking acts that contradicted their conscious values, then either rationalized it away or completely forgot it had happened. This is why possession is so dangerous. It erases the person's accountability. They don't feel responsible for their actions because, in their mind, they weren't acting as themselves. The compulsion to repeat. The last major danger Jung identified might seem less dramatic, but is just as destructive. He called it the compulsion to repeat. This is when someone unconsciously recreates the same painful scenarios, over and over, almost like they're cursed. Toxic relationships, betrayals, losses, it all keeps happening, no matter who they're with. To them, it feels like cruel fate. But in reality, they're unconsciously pulling people into roles that match their unresolved psychological scripts. You'll notice it when someone always ends up the victim of the same type of betrayal, even though the cast of characters changes. Each time, they're shocked. Each time, they feel powerless. But they're the hidden architect of the cycle. Jung called this negative synchronicity. The psyche orchestrates encounters that force a person to relive their original trauma again and again. And if you're not careful, you can get recruited into playing a role in their drama, usually as the betrayer, abandoner, or persecutor. Protecting yourself. Jung's protocol. So what do you actually do when you notice these signs? Jung developed a kind of protection strategy. Simple, but not easy. Trust your gut. If what someone says about you doesn't match your inner reality, trust yourself first. Don't try to convince them. Inflated or possessed people are immune to logic. Arguing only deepens their conviction. Limit what you share. Anything personal can be twisted into evidence. Protect your information. document interactions. Projectors often rewrite history. Having records protects your reality. Reality check with trusted outsiders. Talk to people who know both of you. Outside perspective is a lifeline when you're inside a distortion field. Withdraw when necessary. Sometimes, the only safe move is distance. If multiple danger signs appear, get out before the situation escalates. Remember that patient who forever changed Jung's understanding of human danger? The charming, articulate man who destroyed relationships, ruined careers, and broke down his own brother, all while seeing himself as the innocent victim. Jung eventually realized something tragic but incredibly revealing about him. The patient wasn't randomly lashing out. His projections weren't accidents. They were his unconscious mind's desperate attempt to avoid seeing his own capacity for manipulation, cruelty, and selfishness. He couldn't tolerate the thought that these traits lived inside him, so his psyche expelled them, throwing them onto others. That way, he could stay pure while unconsciously acting out the very behaviors he condemned. And this, Jung said, is the dark irony of shadow projection. People often become exactly what they most fear or despise, all while staying completely unconscious of their own transformation. Consciousness as protection. But here's the hopeful part. Jung discovered that awareness of these patterns breaks their power. The moment you can recognize shadow projection, ego inflation, persona identification, archetypal possession, or repetition compulsions, not just in others, but also in yourself, you step out of their grip. Because the truth is, the most dangerous people are those who remain completely unconscious of their own darkness. The instant you bring that darkness into awareness, it loses its ability to secretly control you. That's why Jung spent his life mapping these psychological dangers. Not to make people paranoid, but to set them free. Freedom from manipulation. Freedom from projection fields. Freedom from being forced into roles in someone else's unconscious drama. The most dangerous sign of all. So, which of these signs did Jung consider the most dangerous? It wasn't just projection. It wasn't even archetypal possession. The ultimate danger, he said, was the combination of unconsciousness and conviction. Think about that for a moment. Someone who is unconscious of their own shadow, yet completely certain of their own perceptions, becomes terrifyingly persuasive. They don't question themselves. They don't pause to reflect. And because they sound so sure, others begin to believe them. That's how reputations are destroyed. That's how families are torn apart. That's how entire communities can fall under the spell of a single distorted viewpoint. When you meet someone who displays this mix, deep unconsciousness combined with total certainty, Jung said there is only one safe move. Protect yourself. Withdraw. Don't fight their version of reality. Don't try to fix them. Hold on to your own awareness and keep your boundaries firm. Jung's hardest lesson. At the core of all of this lies one of Jung's most haunting insights. He wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Most people can't do it. They can't bear to look at their own shadow, at their jealousy, anger, selfishness, cruelty. It's too painful, too threatening to the image they want to maintain. So instead of accepting those qualities, they exile them. And once exiled, the psyche has only one option: project them onto others. Which means if someone can't accept themselves fully, they will inevitably make you carry their darkness for them. You will become the repository for everything they can't face in themselves. And that's why awareness is your shield. The moment you recognize, wait, that belongs to them, not me, you step outside their psychological jurisdiction. Their projections lose power over you. A practical example. Let's make this concrete. Imagine a coworker insists you're manipulative. You know in your bones that manipulation isn't part of what you're doing. You're direct, transparent, maybe even blunt at times, but they accuse you with absolute certainty. At first you defend yourself. You try to explain, but they twist every word into further proof. Before long, others start to believe them. You feel isolated, attacked, and doubting your own perception. That's the trap. But the moment you step back and recognize, this isn't about me, it's about their shadow, you break free. You stop defending. You stop trying to convince. Instead, you quietly enforce boundaries, limit exposure, and seek perspective from people outside their distortion field. That shift in awareness can save your career, your relationships, and your sanity. The 5 patterns in real life. Let's revisit the 5 major danger signs with this in mind. 1. Shadow projection. Someone insists you embody qualities they deny in themselves. 2. Ego inflation. They see themselves as enlightened, righteous, or morally superior, immune to doubt. 3. Persona. Identification. They live only through their mask until one day it shatters. 4. Archetypal possession. They stop being themselves and start channeling larger-than-life roles. Repetition. Compulsion. They pull you into the same painful script they've replayed with countless others. Every one of these patterns shares the same core issue: unconsciousness. When a person refuses to see their own shadow, they end up dragging others into it. How to stay safe. So how do you protect yourself in practical terms? Jung's 6-step protocol is worth repeating. Trust your gut. If someone's description of you doesn't match your inner reality, honor your own perception. Don't argue. Convincing them only strengthens their conviction. Limit information. The less they know, the less ammo they have. Document everything. Protect your reality against their rewrites. Seek external validation. Reality check with people who aren't caught in the distortion field. Withdraw if needed. Sometimes the healthiest move is distance. This isn't about paranoia. It's about boundaries. Recognizing the signs doesn't mean you have to cut off everyone who projects occasionally. Projection is human. But when these signs show up together, escalating in intensity, that's when you need to act. Turning it inward. Now, here's the part that requires courage. These signs aren't just out there in other people. They exist in us too. We all project sometimes. We all inflate our ego at times. We all hide behind masks. And the more unconscious we are about it, the more damage we cause. The real gift of Jung's work is that it doesn't just protect us from others. It challenges us to face ourselves, to accept our own shadow, to admit that we're capable of the very things we despise in others. Because once we accept those parts of ourselves, projection loses its grip. We stop needing to make others carry our darkness. And in that acceptance, we gain a kind of freedom. Closing reflection. So the most dangerous sign in Jungian psychology isn't simply projection or inflation or possession. It's the refusal to see ourselves clearly, the refusal to accept our shadow. Because the moment we deny our darkness, we unconsciously weaponize it against others. And the more certain we are of our innocence, the more destructive we become. But the reverse is also true. The moment we make peace with our own complexity, with the light and the shadow, we break the cycle. We no longer need to project. We no longer get possessed. We become whole. So here's my challenge to you. Think about your own life. Have you seen these warning signs in others? Have you maybe caught glimpses of them in yourself? Recognizing them doesn't make you weak. It makes you conscious. And in Jung's words, consciousness is the shield that protects us from the most dangerous psychological forces in human relationships.